You're listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Here we have the opportunity to listen to the stories that connect our musical family tree. First-hand accounts of performances, musicians, and mentors that shape the way we listen, learn, and teach. On today's episode, we are chatting with violin soloist, chamber musician, and pedagogue Giora Schmidt. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to be with you.
Giora will be performing the Kabalevsky Violin Concerto this weekend. Could you tell us a little bit about your relationship with the piece and when you first worked on it?
Well, I'll tell you, the story with Kabalevsky Concerto is it has this sort of attachment as being a student concerto. Mm-hmm. And I was working with a teacher at the time. I grew up in Philadelphia. And my teacher at the time really felt that that particular piece was for any one of his students who turned 12.
Wow.
And so it was the 12, for me, my association with it was the 12-year-old concerto. But the continuation of that story was I was a very strong-willed 12-year-old, and I said, I don't want to play pieces that everybody else is playing.
Yes.
So I said, no, I'm not doing it. And so let me tell you, I've learned the Kabalevsky Concerto for this engagement at age 37.
Wow, that is awesome.
I've come to the piece rather late. And in fact, I was talking about it today with your wonderful conductor, Yaniv Attar, who we actually know each other from back at Juilliard when he was still kind of splitting his time between the guitar and the baton. And I said, Yaniv, I have you to thank for getting me to learn the Kabalevsky Concerto, and also we're pairing it with this romance by Norwegian composer Johan Svensson, a piece that I also didn't know, a beautiful piece, very much like Edvard Grieg, that type of sort of Scandinavian Norwegian sound, and totally brilliant. It works very, very well. And funnily enough, I'm actually going to Madison, Wisconsin 2 weeks from now and doing the exact same pairing.
Wow.
Because the orchestra in Madison wanted to do Kabalevsky, and they asked me, it's kind of a short piece. Do you have anything that we could pair with it? And I said, as a matter of fact, I do, because this orchestra in Bellingham, Washington just proposed the Svensson Romance along with it. Would you be game? And they were like, done.
Awesome.
So this kind of artistic planning doesn't happen too often in our profession, but I was very, very thankful for the idea. I'm thrilled to be playing it now. I don't think it's a student piece at all.
Yeah, I was going to say, looking back.
It's hard.
Yeah.
And now I understand also why a lot of the 12-year-old kids that I knew at the time playing it played it kind of at half tempo. They only got through the first movement. It sounded kind of crummy.
Right.
That was probably also why I was kind of turned off by it. It didn't, but there's a brilliant recording of David Oistrakh playing it, and so I've always known that recording, but this was a piece that kind of, first of all, it's never programmed, because I think oftentimes people think of it as a student piece.
Right.
It's also too short. It's like under 20 minutes, so you're like, well, what do we do with it?
Right.
But I think if you have the right pairing and the right type of temperament to present it as a rightful piece of the Russian literature that it is. I mean, Kabalevsky died only, I think, in 1987.
Wow.
I think it's very much a sort of hot-blooded, but also kind of cheeky and a little bit kind of youthful in a way. Mm-hmm. Terrific piece. So I'm looking forward to playing it with you all.
That's very exciting.
And just finally to have it in my fingers.
Yes.
Quite a bit later than maybe many others do, so it's okay.
What do you think is what brought teachers to think of it as a great piece to start students off with? Is it something in the technique? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, we have kind of 3 tiers of concerti in violin, starting kind of with Haydn and Bach, and then many people kind of know, audiences will know when you get into kind of Mendelssohn and Bruch, and that's usually kind of the beginning of tier, it's kind of in the middle of tier 1, but there's also Khachaturian, there's Saint-Saëns, so Kabalevsky kind of sits for me in that kind of stack between before the Mendelssohn, before the Bruch. It's got some licks in there, but it's not too. So that's probably why. I think a lot of teachers think, well, it's like just enough of a challenge.
Right.
It's the right length.
Right.
And so I think that's probably the biggest thing. And so it's just more manageable than some of the other concertos that go into that 22 to 25 minute length.
Right. And all the things that come with it.
And then the sort of proficiency on the instrument that one needs to go into that water of a Saint-Saëns or a Bruch or a Mendelssohn, and then from there you kind of depart into, you can do Dvorak and Brahms and Sibelius. Then you're getting into like deep water there.
Right. So you started off very young with professional musician parents,
Yeah.
and you had a teacher who let you say you're not going to play Kabalevsky.
That's right. It was
so how did it all begin for you?
It was a mixed bag. Before I had a teacher that said I'm not going to do Kabalevsky, I had some other teachers that I also said I didn't want to do things with, like practice. And I mean, I was very much struggling with being a regular kid. Mm-hmm. I have to say that my upbringing was fairly normal in the sense that I had kind of a double life. I was very much like I wanted to play sports, and I did. And I wanted to have sleepovers, and I did. And I wanted to go to the mall, and I wanted to have a girlfriend, and, all of those things that, hot-blooded little boys want to do.
Right.
But then at home, I was someone else. At home, I had the violin, and I had parents who, especially my father, was my first teacher at age 4. Very hard on me, very old school. My parents are from Israel originally, so I'm kind of first generation. There's a little bit of this sort of immigrant mentality of you got to do better than we did,
right,
kind of thing. The talent was recognized early. I had a tremendous love for it. I had a tremendous love for all of it in terms of performing, in terms of the ease that it entered my life. Mm-hmm. The challenges was the discipline that was associated with it later. I started practicing a lot as a very, very young boy because I didn't know any better. And then once you hit like first grade and there's like kids and friends and you see like, well, why don't those kids do that? I don't want to do that either.
Yeah.
I just want to go home and do my homework and then, hang out. So I think I was very fortunate that between probably the age of 4 and when do you go into first grade? 7 or 8?
Yeah.
I practiced my butt off. So I had a little bit of that in the bank because then when I started grade school, there was not a lot of practicing happening. Mm-hmm. I wanted to quit several times. It was really, really challenging. And but I grew up in Philadelphia. My parents played in the Philadelphia Opera Orchestra. The Venerable Academy of Music was our home. They brought me to opera rehearsals. I grew up in the opera house, really. I mean, I grew up watching Don Giovanni and Tosca and Così fan tutte, and operas were my cartoons. And I think that served me well because the vocal element that I hear in my head that I try to connect to my instrumental playing has to be from that.
Absolutely.
I don't understand oftentimes why, but it's very native for me. Mm-hmm. And now that I teach, that's all I talk about. I just tell the kids, hey, if you don't know how to play that, can you sing it for me at least? And I don't know where that came from. It had to have come from growing up watching and listening to opera. My parents worked in the orchestra at a time where I guess there was no HR, there was no personnel.
Right. Exactly.
If they couldn't find a babysitter, they snuck me into the pit.
It's awesome.
I have parents, colleagues of mine now who see me, out there traveling and playing, and they're like, we remember when they snuck you into the pit and you were playing with your red truck and you were also conducting along with the conductor, and that was my childhood. So that side of my childhood was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I got to meet anybody that passed through. I met Pavarotti. That was a huge, I wanted to have his white handkerchief all the time.
Yes.
The big smile in the handkerchief was a role model for me.
Totally.
So not bad. But the flip side was the practicing. It was always, the monkey that was on my back. And when you're a kid, you don't really understand the process. You don't understand that, if you put in a little bit of time every day and do what your teacher says, you will get better. So that took some time for me.
Mm-hmm. What about, I feel like, especially people growing up in music, what happens to the moment when it goes from being your parents' thing to being your thing? And when did it become that you wanted to practice? Was there someone you heard or a recording that you fell in love with, or something that changed it for you where you were like...
There was a very clear turning point for me, well, there may have been two. When I was about 14, I think I got first chair in an orchestra in my summer music camp.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, not bad.
Yeah, look at me.
Okay, hey. And then a couple of girls started looking my way, and I was like, not bad. So there was, of course, very superficially the attention that one gets from being, especially when you're in a music camp, band camp.
Yes.
The summer in band camp,
the best
the best of band camp, where you go to your first dance and you have your first kiss and all these kinds of things. And so there was a little bit of that. But I think the real turning point for me was at about 16, because I was just practicing, kind of doing my own thing. Between about 14, I got a little bit more serious. But 16 was like real life, because I got the opportunity to study with Itzhak Perlman and Dorothy DeLay at the Juilliard School, which, of course, for me was, that's like the stuff of legends.
Exactly.
It's really
the
remarkable.
ultimate.
And I was like, this doesn't happen to me, really. It happens to everybody else. And, is this... My connection with Perlman was very much external, because he started a summer music program in Long Island, New York, which I was just one of 35 young violinists that were there. There
Right.
was no attention pointed in my direction at all. I somehow got in there. I don't know why, but I got in there because my teacher at the time in Philadelphia said, Itzhak and his wife have started a camp. You should send a tape.
That's
All
awesome.
right, fine. So I was like, okay. Because my parents were trying to figure out what the heck to do with me.
Right.
Because he's like, he's not practicing, but he's so talented. What do we do? Do we send him to... They were thinking of sending me to, like, music boarding school in London.
Right.
Like tying
Somebody's got to make this boy
Somebody's
work.
got to make this boy work. Like, tying me up and throwing me in the garage. Like
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff,
Yeah.
like crazy things. So, but then somehow... Perlman started teaching at Juilliard in 1999. And I remember very distinctly there was some group rehearsal for a benefit concert for his camp in New York City. So I remember I took the train from Philadelphia and I went up to the rehearsal. And after the rehearsal, we all, scattered and went to dinner. And he pulls me aside for a moment. He's like, I want to talk to you about something. I was like, what did I do now? Because I was always the kid that got in a little bit of trouble. I never wanted to really listen to disciplinarians of any kind. So I was like, oh, God, here we go. And he says, what are you doing next year? And I said, I don't know. I was thinking of auditioning for Curtis, the famous Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. It was, of course, 15 minutes from my house in Philly. My mother went there, was a graduate of there. So it seemed like a sort of a natural thing to do.
Yeah.
I was sophomore or junior in high school. And he said, well, what about studying with me?
Wow.
That was really very, very,
Yeah.
that was exactly how the conversation went. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah, why not? And I said, well, how would that work? Because I'm in high school and I live in Philadelphia. And then his wife was like, well, you can just come up for lessons and sleep here, and then you don't have to go back,
That's awesome.
And I was like, well, but what about school?
They're like,
And she's like, well, I don't know. You figure it out.
yeah.
So then the next question was, and he said, well, and somehow I knew the questions to answer. They're the questions to ask, rather.
Yeah.
And I said, well, but you're away all the time. How's that going to work? He's like, well, when I'm away, you'll see Miss DeLay. And I said, Miss DeLay, but no, everybody knew that even though you said you studied with Dorothy DeLay, she had like a gaggle of assistants.
Okay.
Because she had a class of like 50 violinists. Nobody could see her every week, So you saw one of her assistants, Now, my parents, being musicians, and my dad being a violinist, was like, you don't study with somebody's assistant.
Right.
It was you either study with them or you don't, or we find another teacher.
Right.
So for me, Dorothy DeLay always had a little bit of this stigma attached to it. So I had kind of the wherewithal to say, wait, but Miss DeLay, but people only see her assistants. He's like, no assistants, just me and her. And I was like, all right.
Now we're talking.
I said, well, can I call my parents? Because we got to figure out the school thing and where am I going to live and what are we going to do?
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, go ahead. So that was it.
That's incredible.
So, and you have to understand
That's
also
awesome.
my parents being Israeli musicians from the period of time where he was the star. He was like one of the country's greatest exports.
Yes.
It was him and Pinchas Zuckerman and Yefim Bronfman, the pianist. And for such a country the size of New Jersey, the musical exports
is phenomenal.
from people who were born between 1940 and 1960 was remarkable.
Yeah.
So my parents, who were in that pocket of being born between 1940 and 1960, were like, holy
Yeah. We've done it.
And my dad was like, wow, then he must. Because my dad, you have to understand, the relationship with my dad was such that I don't practice and he was not my friend.
Right.
Because I don't practice.
Right.
I'm flying by the seat of my pants always. And so he was like, well, maybe things are going to be okay. Because at least one of the greatest violinists in the world think that my son has something that is interesting.
Absolutely.
And so that was it. Then it was kind of a race to figure out how to graduate high school.
Right.
Because I'm not kidding you. Like, I would be in bed in Philadelphia. I went to my high school in Philly was such that it was kind of like a young professional children's school. So like there were other kids from Curtis that went there. They had a very unusual curriculum structure. So like sometimes you could come in at like 10 in the morning. You would have class from like 10 to 1 and then you'd be done. So like as it is, my high school was already like very loosey-goosey. Accommodating.
Yes.
For special kids like me, Also some troubled. It was like a weird mix. It was like a house.
Was it like a friend school or something?
It wasn't a friend school. I did do that, but friend schools are not. They don't joke around.
Yeah,
like that's like going to college.
Yeah.
I only managed 2 years of a friend school before my parents were like, "All right, we can't do this because you have no time."
Right.
You're like playing lacrosse and field hockey and on the debate team, and you have to play violin too. It's like, come on. So this school was already kind of loosey-goosey, but literally I would be, let's say on a day that I could go into school at 10 in the morning, my house phone would ring at 9 in the morning, and it's like, hello, is Giora there? And my parents, of course, knew that was Itzhak on the phone. And then my mom was like, Mr. Perlman's on the phone. And he's like, and I'm like, hello. He said, hey, Giora, you want to come for a lesson today at like 2 o'clock? I'd say, okay, I'll let me just get myself organized and I'll get on the train. And my mother would drive me to the Amtrak and I would go on the train. So obviously I wasn't in school that day.
Right.
So I became very truant.
Very, because if it's the whims of whenever he's available.
So then a few weeks go by and the phone rings and it's my principal. Saying, we've been missing Giora lately. What is going on? And they're like, well, he's been taking his violin lessons in New York. And he's like, well, we need to discuss this further. Now, the miracle of all miracles was such that my principal happened to love classical music. So when I went finally to the principal's office, and he's like, well, where have you been? And I said, well, I've been in New York taking lessons with Itzhak Perlman. And he's like,
done.
It's like, okay, well, we need to figure out a way to get you out of here then. And so
Awesome.
it was very, very lucky. So I tell kids, my high school degree is kind of like Swiss cheese. There was a lot of holes and kind of a shish kebab to kind of put it together.
Yeah.
But that was the only way.
But it's cool and very supportive that they were able to see that.
So there was a very kind of, like anything wonderful in life, there somehow has to be the right time and then some turn of events that take place surrounding it to kind of support that ship being steered in a totally different direction.
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened. And then it was on me. And so I was like, okay, I'm no longer in high school.
Yeah.
I'm going to literally take all my hip hop CDs, because I didn't have a classical CD in my room. Like, I was listening to Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur and Wu-Tang Clan, and I was like, people called me Big G. I was a little bit heavier than I was now.
Street cred,
legit.
Philly style.
Like with cheesesteaks hanging out of my mouth. Like, I didn't really exercise because my school, this like special school, didn't have a gym.
Right.
We were given 1 hour to go off campus and go have lunch in downtown Philadelphia. So we went to like Pat's King of Steaks, and we had chicken wings. There was like a fried chicken, like chicken finger. Like, I ate a lot of bad food in high school, but it was delicious. And so here I was with this kind of like new life. Like, so I told my dad, I was like, we got to pawn. Can we take all my hip hop records to the pawn shop? And with that money, I'm going to start a classical CD collection, and I'm going to now be violinist Giora Schmidt. And it was like...
He was probably just astounded.
Couldn't believe it. He's like, what the hell happened to my son? Like,
I've been waiting this my whole life.
I traded my North Face and my Timberlands for like suits.
Wow.
Like,
That's cool.
I went to J. Crew and like got chinos and a button-down shirt. Because I was like, well, I'm going to New York now.
Yeah.
I have to, play the part, whatever that means. I mean, I think I probably look ridiculous. But at the time, it seemed okay. And that was it. And so my only focus was to not squander this opportunity. What did that mean? It meant that I was 200% prepared for every lesson. Mm-hmm. I devoured repertoire like you have no idea. Mm-hmm. I went through the Sibelius and the Paganini and the Brahms and I did Tchaikovsky again with him, and then I did Bartok. I mean, we went through the sonata literature. We went through, like, I was like, okay, I'm done. Next week, what do you want me to bring? Next week, what do you want me to bring? I was like,
awesome.
I was like a machine, and I became like a horse with blinders on.
It's awesome.
That's it. And so that really, for me, was the turning point. That was the beginning of the real work ethic. That was the beginning of the light bulb going off, connecting the dots of saying, okay, if you practice systematically with using your ears and your brain and your eyes and your heart, good stuff
comes out. Yeah.
Very simple.
What was it like in lesson with him? Was he like a 2-hour marathon lesson? Was he quiet? Did he have lots to say?
Well, the biggest thing was that his violin did not enter the room, which means that there was no demonstrating. No examples. Which I think he was very adamant on, because there was no imitation. There was no, you had to make it your own from its inception, meaning however you turned the phrase, however you executed that music, it was yours. Now, he might not have liked it, and he would have said, well, what do you know, like, the biggest question always was like, well, what are you doing there?
Right. What are you saying?
What are you doing there? Yeah. What are you saying? What are you saying with the phrase? What are you saying? It's no different than if you're reading lines and your acting coach is saying, well, I don't feel what you're saying.
Right.
So you got to say it. You got to give me more. Give me something.
Right.
And so that was really the kind of the overarching theme was, I need you to convince me, even in a room where I'm standing or sitting only 10 feet away, so that if I understand it here 10 feet away, the people in the audience will understand it 30, 40, 50 feet away.
Right.
And so it pushed me to speak the music, act out the music, using it in those terms. Because in the concert hall, you have to act it, you have to speak it, it's not just enough to play it.
Right.
Because otherwise the point doesn't get made.
Right.
And, just like acting coaches say, in the theater, you must enunciate to the back row. It's the same concept. And it's not just about volume. It's not about yelling, because we don't play with amplification, right?
Right.
So it's not just, people say, that just means you play louder. No, There's a way to sculpt, shape, pronounce with the tools that we know, with our hands, with the bow, with the left hand, with the vibrato, with the articulation, with the phrasing, with all of the tools that you can pick up at Home Depot to make yourself a better string player. We had to go to aisle 1 and aisle 7 and aisle 11 and then make and you start to pick up these tools, and then through repetition and nagging and bothering and pushing, you start to understand what it is that your teacher's listening for.
Right.
And then you start to hear it yourself, and you're like, damn it.
Yep.
That's what it is. And now that I'm doing, and one of the other things I have to say is that he always believed in the power of teaching. It's actually because of him that I'm teaching. Because that's another great thing, was he was pleased with the progress. And there was another student who was having intonation issues. And he's like, so, you're fixing things very quickly, I've got this one girl who she can't seem to nip the intonation in the bud. It's always kind of a little out. It's like, could you do me a favor and just like practice with her? Just like sit in the room and basically be like the intonation police. Wow. And I must have been, this was maybe second year, third year. I was like, I don't know, maybe 19 or so. And I said, what?
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? He's like, just sit there and go like,
He's like, I don't have time for that.
I don't have time for that, I said, all right. So, of course, I reach out to her and I say, so Mr. Perlman said that I'm supposed to help you. She's like, yes, I know. And I said, okay, could we meet like next Thursday? And she's like, yeah, okay, fine. So we meet and I'm like, look, we're like basically the same age. So like, let's just do this so that we can fix your intonation, hopefully. And then we'll move on. And then we can go get a slice of pizza or something and say thank you. And so it ended up being really fun.
That's cool.
Because she was like, man, you like figured out a lot of stuff out. Like, this is good stuff. I was like, I guess. It was just my own process.
Yeah.
And I would offer her some tips and so on and just say, well, like, have you thought about doing this with your hand? Have you thought about doing this with, And a month goes by and she's playing for him. And at my next lesson, he's like, man, I don't know what you did with her, but that's freaking great.
Cool.
He's like, could you do that for like a couple more people?
So you became the assistant.
So kind of by, and
cool.
so he's like, we're doing our summer music program in Sarasota, Florida, because some snowbirds decided to pay for us to take the program on the road.
That's cool.
And he said, I need somebody to help me down there. So why don't you come and we'll pay you a little bit and you can teach. And I said, terrific. So I got my first teaching gig at like 21. And it was a little bit strange because I was working with students who were peers, but yet somehow I have to help them. And so it forced me to develop a very kind of interesting way of doing it, because it's like, look, I'm not we're the same age.
Yeah.
It's not even the story, well, I'm not that much older than you.
Yeah.
We're the same age.
Exactly. I'm your peer.
I'm your peer. And so why don't we make this like a tip session versus like another lesson?
Right.
You don't need a lesson.
Yeah. Here's some things I figured out.
Yeah. And if it can help you, great. If it doesn't, I won't be offended.
Right.
So that was my attitude.
That's cool.
And I have to believe also I have some teaching in me innately because my mother is also a music professor. My dad has always had students. My mother's mother is a sociology professor. So I think there has to be some probably educational in my DNA.
And you've been receiving lessons
and
since
I've been
birth.
receiving lessons. So it's like an osmosis thing,
Yeah.
right? So I was like, not bad. And then the icing on the cake was it helped me play better.
Yeah.
Because articulating that stuff to other people forces you to just think about it way more clearly.
Yep.
So you're like, damn, why don't I follow my own advice?
Exactly.
That's a free lesson for myself.
Thank you, self.
Thank you, self. Now I can go get a nice dinner. I don't have to pay for a lesson.
Yeah.
So
That's cool.
So that was another component which now at 37 to say that I've been teaching since I was 21, people look at me like, damn.
Yeah.
So when I go and give a master class, I'm offering wisdom that I think many people don't hear, or they have to wait for somebody much, much, much older to come in and share. And for that, I'm immensely thankful. If I have to say, if studying with somebody like that, what is the long-term gift? It's probably that more than anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so special and unique when you have someone who's thought about it differently or figured something else out different from the family tree lineage of the way the teacher taught the teacher taught the teacher.
Exactly.
And sometimes it just takes somebody saying it a different way, and then you're like, oh.
That's right. And I really am sympathetic towards every single person that I work with.
Yeah.
And I think they appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And I just say it in a way of like, hey, look it, I happen to play this piece on some pretty big stages, but I know exactly what you're going through in the practice room. And here's a fingering that I know really works under pressure.
Yeah.
When you have 2,000 people in Symphony Hall looking at you.
Yes.
So I'm going to write it underneath on the bottom of the text of the music, not on the top. Somehow when you write a fingering indication on the top, it's like the royal decree.
Yeah.
When it's on the bottom, it's like it's in parentheses almost,
Yeah.
right? So I'm like, look, I'm going to write it on the bottom, and you just try it. And then they come back the next lesson like, you SOB, that really works. And I said, listen, that's all I'm doing is I'm just, it's not a question of right or wrong. It's not a question of, well, this teacher's better than this teacher. It's just, if I can see that this might work for your hand, then that actually makes me happier than playing a great show, because that sound goes away at the end of the night.
Right.
But if something that I said sticks with that young person, and it made their lives better, and it put a smile on their face, because when you sound good, you feel good. When you feel good, you look good, and it becomes a contagious thing. I'm like,
and they'll never forget it for the rest of their life.
Exactly. And I'm like, that's pretty good.
Yep.
That's pretty good. And that we need more of. We need more of this think tank, collective approach to music making. Things have been very isolated. Things have been like, well, I'm not telling you my recipe for my secret tomato sauce.
Right. Or I'll tell you all of it, but the most important
thing, like the butter.
Exactly.
Or that onion that, ha, ha, ha.
Right.
It's like, why not?
Because they don't want you to be as good as me.
So what?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, I send my students PDFs of my parts.
That's awesome.
And it has my name on the top. I don't care.
Yeah.
And in fact, a student told me recently she played for somebody in a masterclass, and she handed the artist that was giving the class a photocopy of my part, and they were like, "You're not Giora Schmidt." She was like, "No, but I'm using his music for the Korngold Violin Concerto." I said, "That's great."
Knock yourself out, yeah.
And she said, well, this person was very happy with those bowings and figures. I said, you bet your bottom dollar they should be. It took me a long time to put together that part. And I don't like to waste time in the
awesome.
lesson. So I'm just like, here, copy my fingerings
Yeah.
and bowings, and then we can discuss it further.
Right.
Because that's like the blueprint.
Yeah, let's start here and we'll see if
Exactly.
it's working for you.
Exactly.
I love it. Going back to kind of what you were talking about with the stage makeup, if you will, of performing in big rooms. I love to talk with people about that untouchable, inexplainable magic and those moments that come up where it's hair raising and the audience knows and you know.
It's called adrenaline.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about a time where you were an audience member and you heard a piece by anyone, anything, where you were just like, dang, that's it.
That's great. That's great. That's a great question. Not so many, but one recently comes to mind. I remember I heard the Cleveland Orchestra on tour in Miami. They have a winter residency, again, Florida.
That's where it's all the fun is.
That's where all the fun
in
is.
Naples? I just heard about somebody going to see them last week.
They go to Naples. They do
Yeah.
it. They do, those Clevelanders, they figured it out. They're like, if we can leave Cleveland for January and February,
Then we're doing it right.
We're doing it right. And they found, and what's funny is that there's a lot of retired Clevelanders in South Florida.
Yeah.
So somebody there was like, you know what? I want to pay a lot of money to endow
It's awesome.
my orchestra to come to Florida. Great. I wish we could all have that
I know,
gift.
right?
So I remember going to hear Don Juan. It was a mixed program, but they opened the concert with Don Juan, and I was like, holy bleep.
Yeah.
Because that orchestra was like a turbo jet rocket thing that just
Yeah.
blasted the roof off that concert hall. And I was like, that's it. That's why you go.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some. Of course, I've heard many violinists over the years. I don't go to as many violin concerts now because I know too much.
Yes.
It's like
you know the answers.
I know the answers. A friend
Yeah.
of mine is a chef. He's like, I can't go eat in other people's restaurants.
Yeah.
It's painful.
Yeah.
He's like, I either eat in my kitchen or I eat at home.
Yeah.
It's like, I get you. It's
Yeah.
the same. I was like, I can't. I'll go hear pianists. I'll go hear orchestras. I'll go hear, but fiddle players, it's tough. But I remember, again, somebody who's become who's a hero, but also a friend and a mentor, and now just Pinka Zuckerman, who I mean, our wives are friends. I mean, it's kind of amazing how life. He's 70, 72, I'm 37, and now we're just like, he's like a wonderful uncle.
It's awesome.
For me now, and we FaceTime from, he's in Japan or something, and he's like, I just saw this, or hey, have you thought about that? He's like, he's a real fiddle nerd. He's like,
Yeah.
hey, you know that Brahms? Why don't you start Upbo there? I'm like,
Hold
yeah,
on.
good idea. So I'm like, wait a second, let me get my fiddle. And I'm like, wait a second, what time is it? It's like 11 o'clock. I got to put my mute on, or somebody in the hotel's going to throw me out.
Right.
I heard his Brahms concerto with New York Philharmonic, and I remember this must have been probably in the last 10 years. And I got good seats. I was sitting kind of in row M or something, right smack dab in the middle. And his sound that night was like on fire. It was really, and what was hilarious was that was the first night. And then I had other fiddle player friends who went like the second and the third nights. And so I was, of course, telling them, I was like, man, you got to go hear Pinka Zuckerman play the Brahms Concerto this week. They're like, yeah, we went the second and third nights. They're like, I said, I went the first night. They said the second and third nights was like on steroids. It wasn't even like, I said, darn it. So it just got better and better. But that performance for me of a violinist that I can remember attending recently in the last 10 years or so.
What about for yourself? Do you have a couple moments in your journey where you just everything clicked?
Everything clicked. Yeah, there's a couple I think that come to mind where you're like, that was pretty good. I don't remember specifically the piece or the place, which is kind of
That's
odd.
interesting.
But I remember the feeling.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like that's what we're after, is being able to find a way to get yourself back to the feeling.
Yeah, it's the feeling where it's the technical, the musical, the emotional, the spiritual, all are working in harmony. because usually you'll get like 2 of those, and then the other 2 are maybe not, or 3 of those, and the other 3. You know, there's some combination that, you know, and even if you get a couple of them, it's not bad.
It gets the job done.
Yeah, because we're our own worst critics, and a paying audience member will most likely, when somebody asks me what's being a professional, what's the difference between an amateur and a professional musician? A professional musician ensures that a paying customer gets a good experience regardless of how they feel.
Right.
You can have a bad meal, a delayed flight, you're sick, you were vomiting like 30 minutes before you went on stage because that soup didn't sit right with you.
Yep.
If you're a pro, you know how to shove that stuff away for 30, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever it is.
Yep.
And you make sure that the folks in the seats got their money's worth.
Yep.
And that's what it's about. To know enough of what you're doing with your hands so that you can present a finished product. That's for me what a professional is. Yeah. Now, is that a night where you think, oh man, something in the cosmos?
Yeah.
Not always.
Yeah.
But actually, I know a lot of people that say, you know, I played my best shows when I was sick because I wasn't overthinking.
Yeah. And you just have to give in to it
You
all.
just kind of fly and, you know.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a story actually recently, which was a very interesting self-observation. I played the Tchaikovsky recently, the Tchaikovsky Concerto in New Jersey a couple months ago. And I have 13-month-old twin babies. To say that I have practiced a lot this year would be a lie.
An exaggeration.
An exaggeration. But I've been very selective with my engagements because I knew kind of like what was going to happen, and the way the booking works, you can sort of plan things a little bit judiciously.
Yes.
So, but sometimes things don't always, you know, life happens when you're busy making other. And so I was like, well, I got to play Tchaikovsky Concerto next week, and I haven't what? And I just said, you know what? Whatever. I'm going to just do it.
I know it.
I know it. I've played this with some of the biggest orchestras in the world. I've practiced it definitely 10,000 hours. You know that. What's that? Is that the magic? The mastery number.
It's in there.
There's definitely 10,000 hours in the Tchaikovsky Concerto. So I'm like, what's the worst that could happen? And I'll tell you, it was a great concert.
Cool.
It was a great concert.
Awesome.
And I just went off that internal feeling of, I know it.
Yeah, the instinct of it all.
Yeah. And one of the things that I tell my students a lot is at a certain point, you have to trust your practicing. You have to trust that you've put in those hours. Mm-hmm. Doesn't have to be 10,000 hours, of course, but that you've done the work. That's why I don't like to use the word I don't like to use the word nervous. I'm excited, I'm anticipating, I'm doing all these other things, but you're nervous if you didn't prepare.
Right.
That's one of the biggest things that I talk about with my students is the psychology of trusting your practicing. To say, okay, I'm just gonna let go and I'm gonna play. My hands know where to go. Yeah. My ear knows the tunes by now.
Yeah.
Let's just go. And that's what I did that afternoon.
That's awesome.
And it was, of course, a little bit circumstantial because would I have practiced that little if I didn't have kids? Of course not. I would have done the same usual routine that I always do, and it may have been fine. But there was something immensely exciting about sort of what I call like playing off the interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, that money's been in the bank, and now I just, I'm
gonna pull some out.
And I play off the interest. You know, it was still growing in my head, and it's in there, but I didn't put more money in, which is what practicing does, right?
Yeah.
Practicing ensures that you keep growing your balance in the bank. You don't just sort of ride the status quo. And that's what I tell also my students. I'm like, the more you practice, the more gas you have in the tank, the more money you have in the bank, whatever.
Yep.
Whatever metaphor you want to use. And if you let certain things slack off, then things start to dip a little bit lower than you'd like.
Yep.
So then you have to get back in there.
Yep.
So much of it is psychological. It's like, it's amazing when you really...
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And the mental strength that it takes to trust.
That's
it's
right.
an amazing journey, because it really does take a long time or a lot of willpower to let yourself trust yourself.
Completely. I'll tell you, I feel freer now than I did 10 years ago. You know, like I think of myself as kind of a late bloomer, and it took me some time to even accept saying that into a microphone.
Yeah.
Because our business, not our profession, our business is very much symptomatic of Hollywood and show business, where young is hot and fresh, and when you start to get a little older, whatever older means, you're not so bankable, you know? And I've started to care far less about that now, because I know that the depth and the understanding of the music requires so much more than the bankability of the sort of superficial element of who's on that stage. So for me, it's very freeing, where I'm like, you know what? I feel better at 37 than I do at than I did at 27, and that has physically, and it's translated into my music making as well. And I'm also more comfortable just as a person.
Right. And
I think that's a huge thing for young people to understand, is that it's okay to not have not all the answers and everything figured out, and who you want to be as an artist.
Yes.
By 21. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
The business is dictating that.
Right.
The business wants some freak show 12-year-old that sounds like they're with old wisdom.
Right.
That's not normal.
Yeah.
I know a very, very well-regarded piano professor, but they say, talk to me when they're 18. You know, I'd say, oh, did you see this person? Talk to me when they're 18. And it's very, very true.
Yeah.
Because you need life. You need the pain. You need the joy. You need the suffering. You need the struggle to understand. And I appreciate, like, holy hell every time I walk on that stage. Because I know how hard it is to get there. Just to get the opportunity to get there. Because there's and this is what, you know, I might be saying too much, but audiences don't realize how many things go into a season's booklet that they get in the mail.
Yeah.
Like, you have no idea. And it's not just the printing of that booklet.
Right.
It's those names, those people, those repertoires, everything.
Yep.
It comes down to taste and connections and politics and everything. It's a microcosm of life as a whole. Like the symphony orchestra or the chamber music series or the wonderful summer festival you have here in the summer. You know, like there's so many factors that go into getting the gig.
Yes.
And so I'm immensely grateful every time I can walk on stage and have the gig, because you know, there's a line out the door of other people who would cut off my arm to play there in my stead, you know? And that's the spirit that I try to bring every time I walk on stage with the other musicians that I play with, that I'm grateful to be here with you. I'm grateful to play this music with you. We're doing it together. And so I don't want any jealousy or any, you know, behind back garbage that can go on, because this as a vocation, as a profession, is immensely isolating.
Yes.
And you know, we know how many hours we spent alone in the practice room trying to perfect our craft, whatever that means. And so when we come together, And the thing is, I didn't appreciate that when I was 27.
Right.
I appreciate that now at 37. And I think my music is all the better for it. And I know that I can see from colleagues that I play with that kind of appreciation and that kind of enjoyment is contagious on the stage.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And versus just like, oh, here's another violinist that's playing another concerto because they have, XYZ pushing them, or some record company pushing them, or some, like all these, like to me, it's way more basic than that.
Mm-hmm. And I think the opportunity to really interact with other people on the stage is the thing that everyone is addicted to anyway.
Completely.
It's the community this sharing spirit.
Absolutely.
And how
and the audience feels it.
Exactly.
The audience feels it. That's why, like, when people ask, well, what do I need to know in order to come to a concert? You don't need to know anything.
Yeah.
You just need to know what it feels like when everybody's sharing a wonderful experience.
Yes.
That's all you need to know.
Yes.
Just like you don't need to know basketball to know that Kobe Bryant was great. You don't need to know tennis to know that Roger Federer is the greatest. Like you don't need to know. There's certain things that transcend the knowledge of whatever that discipline is.
Yeah.
And so I think that when audience is in the seat and they see that on the stage, they feel part of it, and then that concert hall becomes a temple of sorts. It becomes like the church experience. It becomes like the synagogue experience. Whatever it is whatever your house of worship is, it could be the yoga studio as far as it could be anything, but it's the community, and that's why you need the hall.
Yes.
You need the live concert.
Yeah, we need that space.
You need that space. Yes, Spotify and YouTube is great. I love it. Mm-hmm. It's an incredible resource that we have. But it will never replace coming to the hall and hearing that music. And for me, it's greater than the music. Because people say, well, I can hear that recording at home. When you're sitting next to other people, people don't realize this. That's why you go to sporting games.
Exactly. It's the energy when everybody is connected.
Of course.
You can feel it.
Exactly.
It's thick.
People don't understand it. They're like, well, it's the same in sports.
Yeah. It's like,
duh.
You can watch the basketball game at home.
I can watch the basketball, or you can go, and it's a real difference when you see those lights and you come in and you're like, whoa. Or like you go to the hockey match and it's freezing and everybody's like, and then you're like behind the glass if you get those seats, and they're like slamming into you, and you turn to the person next to you, and you're like, whoa. You can't do that even with a 65-inch 4K, whatever the hell you have at home.
Yes.
And that's the same thing. Like the audio quality now of hearing a Beethoven symphony is tremendous at home, but it's not the same.
And if you can find a way as the performer to capture the audience so that everybody isn't daydreaming anymore and really there with their energy, like in those sporting moments, you cannot
That's what I do.
I
see, like, I straddle between looking and, of course, focusing, because you have to. There's too much going on.
Yeah. You
have to focus on what you're doing. But you can also see out of your periphery if folks are like, or
if they're
like,
not breathing. Yeah.
There's a famous interview with Vladimir Horowitz on YouTube and Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes where they're profiling Horowitz. And towards the end of his career, he only played recitals Sunday afternoon at 3:00. That was in his contract. If you want to hear Vladimir Horowitz, you went Sunday afternoon at 3:00, whatever city he'd be in.
Wow.
And his explanation for it is amazing, because they ask him, why don't you play Tuesday night at 8 like other people? He's like, listen, in America, the men go to work. They come home. They're tired. The wife wants to take them to the concert. They go, but they fall asleep. He's like, I don't want to play when people are falling asleep. He's like, Sunday afternoon, 3:00. They had breakfast. They're awake. They come. They listen. And then they go home.
They learn something.
And they learn something, And I'm like, that guy was onto something.
Yeah.
But when you're Horowitz, you say, hey, I play it. You want to hear me? You come Sunday at 3:00. You don't want to come? I won't. Then don't come.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But I thought, even for an artist like that, it's important for him to have the presence of living, breathing bodies in the hall.
Exactly.
Because he could be like,
he
listen.
Wants to feed off of it.
He wants to feed off of it. Because he could easily say, listen, I'm going to get my fee, whether people are snoring or not, I don't care.
Yeah.
But it's different when they're with you.
Oh, yeah. And you have the opportunity to push yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's important. At the end of the day, it comes back to, do you feel for your own self-growth that you were better tonight than you were the night before or the week before? And I think having those folks there contributes to that growth, because something happens on that stage that you cannot duplicate when you're practicing at home.
Yep.
And it's a combination of the adrenaline, the bodies, the ears, the spirits, the souls that are all there together, that are really there completely for the same reason. Mm-hmm. And I think if you view it with that kind of sanctity in a way, then I think it forces you to adhere to a level that I think if you do it right, the audience will know.
Yes.
If you view it with that kind of importance.
Yeah. Treat the music with the utmost respect.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
This has been absolutely fabulous.
Lovely to chat with you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Check out InsideTheNotes.com for videos and more information on our guests. Follow Inside the Notes podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to receive more information on our next guests.